All right, seems like we're live. I want one of you to please confirm that you can hear me. So I'm going to give few seconds because there is a lag between when I say something or you say something, Shiva, and when these guys here. So can one of you please confirm, audience, that you can hear me? Maybe I can turn this on right here. Yes. So it seems like it's working. Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday sessions. Today, I have one special guest with me, Shiva Manjunath, who is an expert in conversion rate optimization. And I've been enjoying his messages and comments on LinkedIn for a while. And he does an excellent job in positioning, like, how CRO should be thought about, how companies should approach CRO, and just like, how they should be approaching the whole program. And as a result, I thought it'll be good for you all to learn what he has to say. And that's why I invited him on this channel. And it'll be good for us to have that conversation. So for this program, the way this session works is he will be telling you about his point of view and sharing his thoughts. You guys then write comments. If you have any questions or comments, just jump in, type those things. I will be watching those and then talking about those in this session. So before we start, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. I'm not going to delay much. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Shiva Manjunath and let him introduce himself and then go talk about his session or what he's talking about today, and then dive into the session.
Cool. All right. Thanks for that intro. Quick caveat, if you hear my dog barking in the background, it is what it is. He likes to voice his opinions about how I run CRO programs. So apologize in advance if you hear him. But yeah, just a quick intro about me. I've been doing CRO for about 5.5, 6 years. I'm a program manager at Gartner, and I've optimized everything across B2B and B2C. I just love it. I think it's super fascinating. It's such an interesting combination of user experience optimization with digital experimentation with like human psychology, and I think it's just a very interesting field. And I love just talking about it. I love running experiments. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see all the memes that I kind of post about it to kind of poke fun and kind of enjoy discussing CRO. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. A couple of things I wanted to go over today were mostly just, I wanted to open up a conversation about talking about not just, running A/B tests and optimizing kind of your web experience, but taking a step back and saying, you as a project owner of optimization, of experimentation, I've been running programs for about 5 years. I've made some mistakes along the way, and I've learned not only how to optimize, the user experience, but optimize how you run experimentation as a whole. And that's kind of the topic of what I wanted to talk about today. I have some kind of key topics to kind of jump into, mostly talking about my mantra, which is kind of test to learn, explaining the value of experimentation, collaboration with deep, with the functions that you kind of work with, talking about always be testing, manipulating the data and making sure that you're collecting the right data and, sanity checking all the data that you have, as well as a little bit about politics, because as we know, CRO is not just literally running tests, but, playing nicely and getting the outcomes that you want for an overall experimentation program. So yeah, I think the first thing I wanted to jump into is a little bit more of just like test to learn. I think that's the biggest thing that I love talking about because I think it's the most important for running a CRO program. I think a lot of folks generally approach optimization as identifying winners as quickly as possible and, driving revenue and whatever that might be. Where I think if you flip the case around and you focus more on learning about your audiences, learning about what's resonating, when you test to learn, you'll identify winners far more than if you test to win. So that's kind of like my quote that I always say. One of the other things too is as you run a lot of learning-based tests, you learn more about your audience, you figure out what things to kind of hone in and optimize towards and what things you maybe should potentially avoid. And it's almost like machine learning, where the more you kind of run experiments, the more you, as like a machine, will retweak its algorithm to deliver a better experience. Your CRO almost kind of tweaks itself, and you start to learn in, okay, these are the optimization potentials I should focus on because this is what's happening from a user experience perspective, versus, just saying, I think this is going to win because X, Y, and Z, and then just running a test and then moving on to the next thing. Yeah. A simple way to kind of approach test to learn versus test to win is, an example that I generally try and talk about is, kind of, let's say you have a branded video on an e-commerce site and you want to add that to a product page. The test to win mentality is, let's take this video and put it in the middle of the product page because we think this will be the ideal winner. And the way you want to reframe that from like a test to learn approach is taking a step back and saying, I don't even know what this video will do to our users. How will it influence our users? So the approach to that is, I don't know what this will happen. So what will happen by adding this video? So let's try putting it above the fold. Let's see how our audience reacts. And then from there, you can kind of segment your users. You could segment the data to understand this is how we influence our traffic. This is an example of something that I kind of talked about, I actually personally experienced, which was, I did this on an e-commerce site. We added a branded video above the fold. And what we saw was, by adding the video, a lot of people, something like 20% of people were clicking on this video. But what we did was created a segment for people who clicked on the video. And we saw that the people who clicked on the video converted at a much higher clip than the people who didn't click on the video. Mm-hmm. So one, we can identify that this video is helpful. It is instructive to people that they want to take the bait to click the video, but they're also then on the back end converting at a higher clip by clicking on the video. Versus, let's say you had identified that you want to put this video in the middle of the page. Maybe your click engagement rate was only going to be about 4% because everyone's focused more above the fold. They're not seeing this video. You may have missed out on the insight that this video is in fact valuable. Within test to learn, you can actually iterate from there to say, okay, we've tested this video above the fold. It clearly gets a lot of engagement and it's clearly valuable. Now let's iterate from here. Let's move it to the middle of the page. Let's maybe make it even more prominent. Maybe the video is the first thing they see above the fold and they don't see any call to actions. But that's like an insight that you take away from kind of the test to learn versus a test to win. And that's where that learning is valuable.
Yep. Yeah, that's very critical. Actually, test to learn is the mentality that you need, not, and as you mentioned, you can game the system to make something be more clickable or make people click. But if it's not adding value, you're not learning anything, then what's the point? I remember seeing one conference session where somebody said, hey, our goal was to get more clicks on this particular section of the site. So what they did is they just rearranged their modules. And now the one that was getting more clicks now got less click, but this one got more clicks.
Yeah.
So overall, they were not thinking about, okay, what are we learning? Is it influencing something? And they just went, hey, we did this. Look how cool this was. But then they lost at the other end. So you have to kind of think about, what are you learning? What are the implications of these things? Excellent point. I have one comment here. I'm just looking at this, and this is from Dave Rajpal. I think it's more of not related to maybe CRO. Let me read it. I'm an SCM executive and want to shift towards the role of analyst. What else skills should I focus from now on to be really good with work, and some team management tips? Well, Devraj, this one is a great session for you to listen to, because all these, as an analyst, whether it's in search engine marketing or whatever you're doing, is, CRO or experimentation plays a huge role. So I think listen to this, and then we can take offline and talk about the other stuff as well. Cool.
Yeah, and I think you kind of made a point about, it's not just a bubble. It's not just an isolated little event of, adding a video versus not. Because if you add this video to the page and you find that a bunch of people are in fact clicking on this video and it is valuable, that's insights that you not take away from a web perspective. Maybe that's something you could expand to everything digital or even further. Because if you find that this video is in fact valuable to web users, the potential for you to use this video on other parts of your site or other channels, or even, if you have a store presence, maybe this is something you even throw on, like local stores. Like the insights you gain from this type of knowledge is not unique simply to, the specific product page in a specific video.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like one of the insights to like talk about with test to learn is a lot of CRO, the perception around CRO, which I'll go into another section deeper, but like a lot of this perception of CRO is like, how many button colors can you run in a single test? And like, what are the different call to action buttons that you could test? And to a certain extent, I get it. It makes sense because you think conversion rate optimization, and what is the one thing you can define closely to conversion, which is a button for add to cart or whatever. So I kind of understand the perception, but as experimenters who are close to this, we all know that's such a narrowly focused. It's a very narrow way to kind of approach experimentation. And think about test to learn. If you've run a test and then you identify that blue is a better CTA compared to red, like what does that really help you do? It may get you some conversions, sure. Maybe you found a statistically significant lift. Maybe there's contrast. Maybe there's other things you can maybe take away from that. But you're not really taking a strategy from this. You're not taking an insight or a learning that will help you with future iterations or will even help you to understand user behavior in any kind of helpful way.
Yep.
One of the examples of a test that I ran a while ago too was when I was working on an e-commerce site. What I saw was a bunch of people through Heatmaps and through user testing were on our category pages clicking low to high. Like on the filters for the category pages, the deepest shade of red you've ever seen is low to high. So that's an insight that you take away to say clearly a lot of users are not interested in the expensive products that they may be seeing. They just want to look for cheap products. What was unfortunate about the way we built the site was when you click low to high, it surfaces a lot of products that are inherently cheap, but not valuable products, things that many users probably wouldn't even buy on a normal extent. Like if the average order value of the product was, let's say $20, $30, we were surfacing like, filler add to cart items, for example, like pencils that maybe cost 50 cents or something like that. And obviously that's not valuable for, an e-commerce site to surface that, given the vast amount of people clicking on this low to high. So the insight was a lot of people were clicking low to high. The test that we ran was, we know that a lot of people are clicking low to high. Instead, why don't we take a curated list? Why don't we add a banner above there that says gifts under $40, gifts under $50, something like that. That way, those people who would have clicked low to high instead get taken to a page that's a curated list of products we define. We take them to a specific category page that we define, but it also satisfies the user intent of finding products low to high, cheaper products. And holy crap, that test just kicked butt. The conversion rate did tremendously well. The engagement we got on that banner was absurd. What we did actually do is we dropped AOV in the process, but that's okay because the test to learn mentality is you're not going to win on the first, second, third, or fourth test. If you get really lucky, maybe you will. But for the most part, you won't win from a revenue driving standpoint on the first test. We did hit a statistically significant conversion rate lift by doing this test. But we then realized, all right, well, AOV is something that we can then iterate on the next version and maybe help try and upsell or create other ways. And then we did run subsequent tests, 3 or 4 tests beyond that, to the point that we saw something like a 15% lift to conversion rate with a minus like 10%, 12% to AOV. But then we iterated and kept that same stable lift to conversion rate while also improving the AOV from there. So I think one of kind of the key takeaways from this too is kind of like iterations. Don't simply assume like you're going to be running one test to learn test and that's it. Every learning that you get from a test is going to continue to compound and you're going to continue to iterate from there. That'll create a very efficient cycle for you.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines is Brian Eisenberg wrote this book, Always Be Testing, which is A/B testing, always be testing. You're always learning something. So don't stop and say, okay, we learned, this is what happened. We're not going to do this, but iterate through those things. You will learn so much. And then once you learn, apply it to new tests. So I think that's a very valuable point. Everybody should understand, because most of the people like, oh, we ran the test, it didn't work. I don't know. I don't buy into this thing. But you're learning. You don't know unless you experiment. You do not know. I mean, that's how, we're talking about like the digital side of things or product, whatever. We do that in real life all the time, like we're testing, right? Should I take this road or this road to where I want to get? We're always every day kind of experimenting. Once we find a route, then we take that and then we experiment on other stuff. Should I stop here? Should I get that coffee? We do that every day.
Yeah.
And we just have to apply the same mentality here.
It's funny you say that, because I don't know if this was subconscious or not, but it probably was subconscious, although it's manifesting now. I, without realizing it, ordered 2 pairs of earbuds to listen to, like, try out. And I'm literally going to be A/B testing. I'm going to put one bud in one ear, one bud in the other ear, and like listen to music and see what the quality is and what the volume is. So like inherently there is some amount of testing that we do in our real life. And it's always mind-boggling to me that we do this type of testing in our real life. But when it comes to approaching it from like a digital optimization and just like a digital approach, we don't have that much scrutiny with the web compared to what we do in real life.
Yeah. I mean, I always look at, one way of applying this. Kids always do that. You look at everything they're experimenting. I like this. I'm going to try this, right? When you're little. As you grow older, you kind of becomes like risk averse. And that's the same mentality, adults have. Oh, I just know this is going to work. That's how we're going to do it. But you have to let go of that, because there is, experimentation as you're learning. You're going to fail on some things, and that's okay, right? That's part of learning. And that's the cultural shift that's needed.
That's a great point. And this is something I wanted to touch on in the section too. What a lot of people are adverse to in experimentation is losing test variations that drop revenue, meaning, oh, I don't want to run this test because it could lose and it could drop revenue.
Yeah.
And there's a couple like points I would push back on. One, we all know experimentation is risk mitigation, right? It's you're doing something in a controlled version so you can know if the next thing you're trying to push out is actually going to be worthwhile to do or not. So that's kind of like point one. But point two is when you run a test to learn program, the way I justify losers is you're paying for insights. So UX, when you literally run a user testing workshop where you like hand them a piece of paper or go through a wireframe, that's inherently driving $0 of revenue directly, because that's not going to help you directly. Obviously, the insights are valuable. You're going to use that to create a better experience, but that literally drives $0 of net revenue immediately. When you, let's say, run like a Hotjar poll or something on your website or exit intent, something like that, that you're asking users, how do you feel about your website? Inherently, that survey is going to drop conversion rates. That is going to be something that is not valuable to the user experience in that point, but you're gaining insights from that. When you run a testing tool, it slows your site down for the most part, unless you're very good at optimizing your code. But even then, there's inherent drops in site speed, which will likely drop conversion rates to certain extents. But you're gaining insights from an experimentation program. We should approach experiments themselves in the same way, that you run a test and you actually learn something from there. So even if it drops conversion rate by 10%, and let's say the revenue lost is $20,000, something that is maybe not the most valuable use of your money, you still gained that insight to know something happened in this test, and it's going to help you for the next test and the next test and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And one of the things I love about CRO is a lot of the insights you gain from the testing is just so valuable, not only for digital marketing, but senior leaders. So like I just presented to my senior leadership team a couple weeks ago, and I showed them some Hotjar heat maps. I showed them some insights that we gained from our first quarter, showed them test results. The test results, 2 or 3 of those tests just lost straight up. It was like minus 10, 15% to conversion rate. But I focused on the insights and I told them, this is what we're seeing. This is the behavior. These are the iterations. This is where we're going to take it. And like they scoffed. They're like, I don't care about the drops in conversion rate. This is so valuable. And like, it was a 15-minute meeting that ended up being like 45 minutes because everyone was chiming in with ideas and thoughts and saying, I'm going to take this here. And I got like 10 follow-ups from people I've never talked to before. And they're like, I wanted to learn more about this.
That's a win.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
a big win. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, and on that point, it's not just having these insights to, drive revenue and drive, overall business positivity. It's helping to provide, senior executive leadership support for your experimentation program. That the insights are going to help build trust that your experimentation program is something that is valuable, that should be overstaffed and should continue to, be invested in for long-term success for the business.
Yep. And one of the things also is, a lot of analysts focus on, I have to find something good or something bad. But sometimes just saying, hey, whatever we are doing and we're learning that it's actually working is also a great insight. Hey, we did this and these things that we put together are working fine. That is a great insight. Yep. Now let's test something else to see how we can break it to move forward, right?
Yep.
So that test and learn mentality, and this is a very, very key point. Fear of, hey, what if we run this, if we lose this? It's not like you said. Even if they were losing, you were finding some insights that can help business learn and move forward.
Right. And that's where the difference between test to learn versus test to win. In a test to win, if you're not gaining insights along the way, then people have more of a reason to be like, okay, well, this experiment, we lost X amount of dollars. Is that it? That's all that happened? Versus a test to learn, even if it lost that money, you could say, well, sure, we did drop some money along the way, but we gained this valuable insight that we're using for the next iteration and the next iteration.
Exactly. Yep. Cool.
One of the interesting test wins that I had probably about what feels like a month ago. Time feels weird for me, but
everybody's feeling the time these days. No, it's the pandemic, man. Just getting logged in, right? You don't know what day it is.
So we ran a test, and we ran this particular test first that was trying to pull forward more category-focused content to try and be more interesting to our users. So we kind of started with that test. The overall test was an inherent loser. But what we did identify, and this is I'm going to go into this a little bit more into a data-focused section, but one of the insights we got from segmenting out was there was a base of our users who do really like this content. And then there's a large base who don't need that content. So that test ultimately lost, but we were able to identify a subset of our users where this was kind of valuable. It wasn't statistically significant, but there was a trend in a direction that were some insights. So we kept that bucket to the side. Then we iterated a couple different times on this test to continue to validate that this subset of our market did like content, but some more smaller scale tests, mostly because we had a little bit of a limitation in dev resources. But we did continue to vet our hypothesis that this market, this segment of users do like this category focused content. Mm-hmm. And then from that point, what we said was, all right, we do have the dev resources. We do have the financial backing. Let's swing for the fences. We feel confident based on these 3 or 4 tests that we've run that our hypothesis is that we need to create a content focused experience for these users. We built a super disruptive landing page test that looks nothing like the original, but was heavily focused in on this category content. When we ran this test, we ran this test in our segment of users that this did do well in and not. In the not, it was minus 25% of conversion rate. In the segment that we believed it would do well, plus 45% lift to conversion rate on desktop, plus 125% lift to conversion rate on mobile.
Wow. Yeah.
So, but those are results that are honestly might be a personal PR for me in terms of lift, but those are, that's not, you're not going to always hit that type of results, but we took a calculated approach. We ran multiple tests to validate our hypothesis that this bucket of users needs this category focused content. And then when we had the time and flexibility, we swung for the fences, tested big, and then boom, we hit that winner. Versus if we had just tested this experience, the odds that we would have actually been right with our hypothesis and done this probably wouldn't have been there. Also, we might not even have realized that there was a particular segment between these users.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to optimize between. So we would have just seen the whole and be like, all right, well, this is bad. Let's move on. Versus the subset did incredibly well. And the other users validated our hypothesis. So now instead of having one group, we now have two smaller groups. And
yeah, segmentation is key, and we talk about trying to get to one-to-one personalization, but till you get to one-to-one personalization, there are certain needs for certain segments, certain things that work for certain segments and won't work for other segments. So you have to always slice and dice and see which segment it's working for. Then you found a winner in that segment, and there is other subset as well where you can try a bunch of other stuff. So A/B testing or experimentation, whatever leads then to creating, okay, how can we create a better experience for this set of users and this set of users?
Yep. And I think the last kind of point I wanted to touch on in this like test to learn section, I guess, is this is such an incredibly efficient way for a number of reasons, but mostly because iterations are so important to test and learn. Iterations themselves are so valuable because theoretically, when you're iterating off of a test, some of the code's already half baked, if not more than half baked. So let's running an experiment. If you need to iterate and make a couple small design tweaks based on the test results, you already have that test mostly built out. So it's easier to iterate from that design rather than starting from scratch and building a brand new test. The other thing is that test is based in data, right? You literally have the previous experiment data. You have Hotjar, you have session recordings, you have whatever analytics data to kind of back up what's happening in this experiment. So in a prioritization framework, that test should be higher prioritized. I don't think I've won a single test that has been the first test that I've run. Every test I've won and won big has been maybe the fourth or fifth iteration. So that's also why test to learn is incredibly valuable. And you might hit, let's say 5 to 10% lift conversion rate test or whatever metrics you're optimizing for. You might hit those for the smaller scale tests. You might hit those for the test to win. You might. Your win percentage is going to be far less. But the test to learn, you'll hit bigger wins and you'll hit, better wins, user experience wise.
Yep. Cool. Any comments from audience? Please make sure to type your comments here or questions. Even if you just have a comment on what Shiva was talking about, make sure to mention that here. I want to hear back from you. So just wanted to give it a call out here for people to put their questions and comments.
Cool. So for the next section, value of experimentation, I wanted to show you guys the slide here. I think this is indicative of what I've been seeing with a lot of CRO. So I don't know if you guys can see this over here, but a while ago, I tried to Google CRO to see how people are defining it. And, this is not, I did cherry pick a little bit with this, but there are a lot of prominent articles where if you just try and search what is CRO, how do I optimize my website, whatever, button colors, button text, button color, button text, everywhere. So I think that's a very important thing to kind of call out is this is what the state of CRO is for some of your coworkers and some of your peers as they see it. That's not what we define CRO. That's not what we define experimentation is. I mean, even CRO is kind of one of the worst ways to describe it because CRO isn't really strictly conversion rate optimization. I try to coin it as customer experience optimization. So in fact, yes, I am a CEO. I don't think a lot of people like that I have that title, but I don't really care. But
go ahead, because I have my thoughts on this too, right? When clearly for me, when I look at CRO, it seems so focused on conversion rate, right? Even before the going live, I was saying, hey, we're doing experimentation. In my opinion, CRO is way more than just experimentation, right? It's not running A/B test. But I think there are some overlapping things, some confusing things, and customer experience optimization. Well, and that means, are we talking about digital customer experience optimization? Does customer support play a role? Sales play a role? Because customer experience is not only the experience on the mobile app or web or whatever, it's the overall experience with the brand, right?
Right.
So is it really customer experience optimization? I'm struggling with that term to come. Experimentation is saying, hey, we're testing. But so I think there is a lot of debate that needs to happen around this and finally come up with the term that everybody can align to.
Yeah, it's weird because like if you approached two digital marketing analysts, digital marketing analyst A might have a very unique subset of skills for one that the other wouldn't have. So I think it's a weird topic to fixate on. I do think that it's a bad name, but I don't think it's the worst thing. Like if you're fixating on this, I think it's not like it's kind of a waste of time. Like I know what I do for my org. What I do for my org is experimentation at its core.
Yeah. Yeah, I think industry, because whenever I put CRO, funny thing is, I have so many groups where I participate in Facebook, LinkedIn, and these people are digital marketers, digital analysts dealing with, managing all these things. And I put in CRO, one guy goes, "What is CRO?" So every time I have to explain, and then I started putting conversion rate optimization. Then people say, "What is conversion rate optimization?" I do A/B testing. Is that what you're talking about? So there is some confusion. Yes, we should not be spending time, but I think there has to be some term that people can align. And maybe Gartner can come up with that term, because you guys can define that.
Yeah,
Maybe CEO, you define that.
I'm a CEO. That's what I am.
Yeah. I have two comments here. JB Wyman, thanks for the webinar, Anil and Shiva. And another question, any thoughts on center of excellence versus individual central CRO team structure? I am considering moving to a center of excellence.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it just depends on how your org is matrixed. I don't think either is wrong. I've been developing my own center of excellence for CRO within my function. It started as the former, but it is now becoming the center of excellence that I wanted it to ultimately become. So I don't think either way is wrong. They do have their pros and cons. It being a center of excellence might mean you might have less political pull to do the things that you potentially need to do. You might have less resources versus if you sit within the product team, if you sit within the engineering team, you'll have more of those dedicated resources and be able to influence that team in a different way. So I think it does have its pros and cons. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Personally, I think a center of excellence does work really well. And I think a lot of orgs are shifting to creating a kind of digital optimization center of excellence where they're more like consultants to help with the whole business rather than, maybe a hybrid model could be the best option that incorporates both, where you have a center of excellence, but you have a representative in each function. So you have someone who sits on the team and you have a center of excellence to kind of collaborate between the two. That's probably the best case scenario, but, I'll say this, if you even are considering both, like either option, you're in an incredibly positive direction versus a lot of companies who don't even consider digital optimization as a function worth investing in. So if that's what you're talking about, you're in a really good spot, I think.
I'll comment on this thing. You mentioned the hybrid model, which hub and spoke model, right? Mm-hmm. You have center of excellence in the center that's actually driving the direction of overall program and evangelizing that and training people in different product teams, different other teams that are doing experimentation. So I think that model works best because now this team is overall responsible for saying, hey, why this makes sense. And this person who's embedded within the product team, their job is to make that product better by leveraging the learning. So they don't have to fight those battles because somebody else is fighting the battle for them. Yep. That model works for bigger companies. Smaller companies, one person, two people running this, you can't have that kind of model, right? So and at that point, you have to just sit within a product team or where you can make a difference. And once that kind of starts to take, starts to help them, then you can evangelize and build some things. So every company, every organization is different. And companies keep changing that as well. This model did not work. Let's do this.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. Like I'll repeat what you said because I really like the way you phrase it. It's just sit where you can make a difference. And with CRO specifically, from everyone I talk to, it's an underfunded function. It's just not getting the attention that it deserves. And as much of a limitation a CRO can be to your org, or as much as you are limited in your abilities to run a CRO program, the best thing you could do is sit in an org, sit in a function that you can impact change in the best to your ability. So I really like the way you phrase that. I think that's a great call out.
Cool. I have another question here from another Shiva Kumar Challa.
Nice.
How can we implement CRO for B2B websites to generate more leads?
Great question. I guess it would depend on kind of what resourcing you have available. If you do have the budget to invest in tools like Google Optimize or Optimizely or VW or whatever the case might be, I'm not going to advocate for one specific tool over the other. I think there's a lot of really good tools out there. I would definitely invest in one of those tools. I think Google Optimize is part of the Google Analytics suite that is free. So you might be able to start at a smaller scale with those types of tests, that tool, just to kind of prove out that it is worth doing. As much as if you do have the flexibility to invest more into a CRO function, I think tools like Hotjar, more heat mapping tools are extremely valuable for the insights that you gain with experimentation, not only just running experiments, but understanding A versus B, if the elements that you're adding are resonating from a session recording to see if they're clicking on it, from a heat map, from a mouse movement, etc. So I think that's kind of a bonus. At a bare minimum, you definitely need a tool to start testing, as well as analytics to be set up properly.
Yeah.
It also obviously depends on your traffic volume too. Like if you are a very, very small B2B company that you don't have enough critical mass of traffic sourcing, A/B testing might not be the best opportunity for you to test because you do need minimum sample size to reach statistical thresholds. But as long as you do have good traffic volume, as long as you do have a stable traffic volume and you have a tool that you can start running tests in, I think that would be a great opportunity for you to start in. And also another bonus, if you do have good development resources to back your experiments as well, that will always help you out. One thing I'd say is as you're trying to scale up your program, I would not fixate on the low hanging. I would fixate on more low build, high ROI type tests. So for example, you don't want to just run a bunch of button color tests, because the worst thing you could do is set a preconceived notion that all CRO is button color testing. Again, to the point, like you don't want them to just assume that's the case. You're also not going to hit the impacts, and you're not going to hit the big wins that you would want for leaders to look at that and say this is worth investing in. I would start with kind of just looking at your analytics and saying these are some of the problem pages. Maybe if you do have the heat maps, take a look at the heat maps to see what people are gravitating towards versus not. Look for potential choke points and start testing those quickly. Different iterations of that to remove those choke points quickly to see if you can improve, get some low hanging fruit wins to drive some kind of immediate impact to justify more spend into the program.
Yeah. I think, you made I think you mentioned a few times now, heat maps and session recordings. Those are not very used or underused, I would say, at many organizations.
Yeah.
You just do put Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics and start to look at the data. But session recordings and heat maps can show you a lot about how user is using your site. And granted, if you put call outs on your left-hand side, they're going to gravitate towards left-hand side, or some things do work that way. But they can show you where you have missed opportunities, the stuff that you want them to see. So there are free tools, like you mentioned, Google Optimize, use it for free. Hotjar also, I think, has a free version, or there is also Microsoft Clarity, which does both session recording, and it's completely free. And I think they have Heatmap. I don't remember. I use so many tools. But I have actually, I did a live session on Microsoft Clarity, which you can find on this channel as well. And then there is also how you can use session recordings to understand user behavior. Take learnings from those, apply it, and conduct your A/B test like B2B, you need traffic, like you mentioned, right? Or let it run for a very long period of time, but then, your enthusiasm goes away after
Yeah.
a while. So,
I mean, one of the things you could bypass low traffic is test big. So it's not button color testing when you only have 50 sessions coming to your site a day. What you would do instead is you obviously need a bare minimum threshold of traffic, but test very radical designs based on a hypothesis, but test very radical designs because you'll either win big or lose big. But again, keep it to the core of learning. So let's say your version A is more focused on the benefits of the product versus the second version is more focused on testimonials and something like that. Have a core hypothesis that you're testing that you could learn a little bit more, but be more disruptive in how you're approaching that design. That'll help you kind of bypass that.
Yep. Excellent point.
And one thing I wanted to call out on, but
I was going to say, go big on those changes, then you can see the impact. This works or this doesn't work, those kind of things.
And the other thing I was going to call out with like heat mapping and session recording is be very filtered in how you approach watching and tracking things. So obviously with heat maps, you kind of just set a particular page. If you have unique segments that you've already identified to optimize further, definitely go ahead and create those segments and maybe have Hotjar track specific segments of those. So for example, what I'm doing currently is a project that involves, I've identified, a bunch of different segments within our markets that I've identified as, maybe high or mid or low intent type buyers. So I'm using Hotjar to intelligently target those subset of audiences. And I'm creating Hotjar segments for all of these and just letting it run as a baseline. I'm not running tests on those at this point, but I'm just letting Hotjar run to get a baseline understanding of what's happening. But if you just look at session recordings and say, all right, there's a bunch of session recordings I'm going to click. That was one of the fatal mistakes I made very early in my career is I would just spend a lot of time watching session recordings and hours and hours and hours and learn nothing from it. Versus you have to approach session recordings as I have a particular thing that I want to learn more about. So I'm going to go to this particular page. Hopefully I can identify that this is a particular subset of users, and then I'm going to watch these 20 recordings.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there is Jacques Warren, who has been, who's a friend of mine for years, who has been running these, using session recordings a lot for like past 10 plus years, I would say, ever since they have started, ClickTale started and all those session recordings came up. He did a session with me to specifically talk about how to efficiently and effectively use session recordings. So I would suggest if you guys are interested, go watch that session as well.
Cool.
Yeah, otherwise it's going to take a lot of time and then you'll be like, what am I doing here? Looking through all these sessions.
Yeah.
But if you have a focus, like you were mentioning, focused approach, I want to learn on this page or this section or this audience, then you have something to, you can quickly get to.
Yep, exactly.
JB Wyman, thank you both for your answers. He asked a question about Center of Excellence.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's something that I'd love to explore a little bit more and follow up, but it's a really good question.
Yeah, cool.
All right, I think I can just kind of wrap up on the value of experimentation. I think we all understand that it's extremely important. I touched on a lot of different things, but I think I'd say, let everyone involved in the process of experimentation know, one, how valuable it is, how complex it can be, and how it should be complex, meaning you shouldn't be running simple kind of button color tests. You should definitely be running copy tests. You should definitely be running positioning, like brand positioning type tests. You should be running functionality tests. Those are where you're going to learn more. Again, test to learn mentality. That's where you should be living in. You shouldn't be living in kind of button color tests. And also kind of the value of experimentation is not only winning big, but preventing risk where, you're not just rolling out something that you think is going to be a winner. Short story, I was working with a UX team a couple of years ago, and they were about to roll out a change on the site based on their UX studies. And I said, whoa, hold on. Let's test it. There's a lot of adversity towards that, but they agreed to run a test. we ran an A/B test, it lost by like a bit.
Mhm.
So the insights were there, the insights were valuable, but the execution within the design was not what the users were looking for, clearly. So we iterated a couple different times. The first version, we had a lot of insights to iterate on the second time. Second time didn't win, but it was better. Third time didn't win, but it was much better. Fourth time, it did win, won big. Obviously, the UX team was grateful that it happened, but sometimes CRO has to insert itself in the conversation to say, hey, I'm important, include me. I need a seat at the table. With UX, with devs, with engineers, which is actually a pretty good segue into the next section of kind of collaboration.
Yeah. I'm going to add something to there, winning, rolling out these features or new things. When you have a big change on your site or app or whatever product, right? Huge change. And sometimes you want to roll those things out because one, that's where the industry is moving, even though it's losing, right? But you also have to minimize the impact. So you just can't go, hey, we're going to lose 50% of conversion. We're going to roll out because everybody else has been rolling out. Whether it's like, hey, everybody is moving to bigger fonts, bigger call outs, and that's how it's happening in the industry.
Yeah.
So you can control those things. What you can do is you can actually slice your rollout into pieces. It's going to take time, test them out, things that work, you can roll out. I've seen way big tests, or we've been involved in those things where we rolled out certain stuff, even though it was a loser, like tiny bit, not a big, and everybody was aligned and said, that's fine, because that's where we want to move to. So, but this gets everybody on this table. Insights are there. Shiva has been focused on many, like, you're learning. So you're learning, you're gaining the insights. And if those insights, and based on that data and test results, you still decide, and everybody decides, we are going to go do that, that's fine. But it's not like you roll out and all of a sudden everybody's screaming.
Yeah. So. One really good example of this is Craigslist, where they did a whole redesign. I mean, everyone was used to their, 1990s-esque website that was very flat, whatever their UI was. So they redesigned it and then just launched it, and a bunch of users just really didn't like it because they were all used to it. I think website redesigns is another one of those, obviously there's a lot of user testing that goes into it. Maybe there's like a new tech stack, or maybe there's some improved site speeds as a proxy of a new front end design. But if the end result is a bunch of users are complaining, saying this is garbage, I hate this, I don't want to use the site anymore, do you still move forward with it? Which I think a lot of execs would be like, no, if this is a hated experience, we don't want to move forward with this yet. And I think there's an interesting conversation to have about like redesigns and testing in there versus not. I think, to your point, the staggered approach, where you maybe roll out smaller changes here and there based on testing, based on insights. If there's other things to potentially gain, such as site speed, where you're going to drop conversion rate by X%, but it'll be faster, and we agreed to drop conversion rate to this point, but we're going to take this as a base and iterate from here because there's other benefits that we gain, based on other things that could potentially be helping you out, then that's okay. But at least everyone has to be aligned on those goals together.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I think one of the big kind of points on this is collaboration, which means making sure that everyone involved everyone that needs to be and would like to be involved in CRO is involved in a level that makes sense and they like, but also encouraging participation for other users to come into the program and continue to contribute in positive ways. I think the big collaboration functions for me with CRO would be things like the brand team, the marketing teams, the engineering teams, and the UX teams. I think those are kind of the three big ones that definitely need to be involved. I think bonus would be things like customer service, sales teams, people who are maybe on the front lines and hear directly from the customers what problems they're experiencing or challenges that they have. I definitely think that's a valuable untapped potential of insights that you could gain. I've sat on multiple customer service chats on a couple e-commerce sites, and you read them and you're like, oh, you don't like how the website works because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's interesting. Some of it's not valuable. Sometimes they just complain like, oh, it's too expensive. Like, okay, well, you know, you can only optimize the site so much, but you can't really change the price necessarily. But there are insights to maybe take away that, okay, well, maybe there's a subset of users who need to focus more on the cheaper products versus, you know, there's a suite of users who are totally comfortable with the blank check and they just want the best experience. And maybe that's a segmentation that you can do. But anyway, takeaway from this, I think customer service is a very interesting insight that you get free insights from because they're complaining to you for free. So,
correct.
So I think it's valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you said customer service, those chat transcripts, feedbacks that come from the website. Social media is a great way to also learn about
that's a great one too.
What's breaking on your site.
Yep.
So, most of the analysts are digital analysts when they're thinking or CRO. They're basically, well, those who are doing CRO for quite some, they know how valuable the qualitative information is, not just quantitative one. But most of the digital analysts only focus on the quantitative side of things. They're not looking at these qualitative. Session recording, I would say, is kind of mixed between qualitative, quantitative.
Totally.
Yeah. And but social media mentions chat transcripts. Chat transcripts are like the customer support transcripts are really, really valuable.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you have to look through them and you'll see, yes, this didn't work. Hey, I can't get this. And I don't know how many people listen to, when I'm on the phone and I'm calling these and they say, press this, press that. And I'm sure a lot of people are frustrated and swearing at those. I think they should listen between those. Press this option, press that option. They'll learn a lot.
Yeah. My little joke in there for sometimes, I 100% agree. I think chat transcripts are very valuable. The only thing is I've seen quite a few funny transcripts where people are just clearly trying to be trolls and not actually have a valuable chat experience. And sometimes they can be a little aggressive with some of the advisors. So you feel kind of bad for some of the people who have to read and deal with them.
Well, you have to feel what they go through, right? Because it's like, you have to optimize the experience. You're not only optimizing for customers, but you're also optimizing for your internal employees, for them to not get
for sure
of that, right?
For sure. Yep. And I think you kind of touched on another point, like, is Hotjar qualitative or quantitative? And I think it's a mix of both. But that's where I kind of approach CRO. Like, there's pillars of data that feed into, your business analytics. Hotjar is qualitative and quantitative, mixture of both. User testing, more qualitative, but still a data pillar. User research, user testing, qualitative. Analytics data, that's pure quantitative. Running an experiment is a little bit of both. And I think there's all these pillars of data that feed into not only to your experimentation program, but feed into the business the business data unit that you have. So I think one of the reframes I try and do is just approach CRO in that way. And in that way, if you just have CRO data as a pillar and UX data as a pillar, and both of these are not talking to each other, then you're missing a very big boat of this. Mm-hmm. So like collaboration with UX has been absolutely critical in not only us winning big, like CRO winning big, but also the UX teams having insights for their designs. And it's a two-way street where we give them data and then they give us data. And like, it's a constantly evolving thing. One of the things that really kind of pushes, if you can have weekly or bi-weekly syncs with the UX team, so they know what tests you're running, kind of what projects they're undergoing, so that you guys can work collaboratively together. There was one insight that I got from a test that once I ran this test, it literally got pushed to the whole function of UX, and it dramatically changed the scope of I think it was a category page test that they were running. So at first they were going to design it one way, but based on this concept absolutely kicking butt, they flipped it around and said, clearly this is a concept that's worked. We've tested it 3 or 4 different ways. It's shown that same positivity. let's take this concept and put it onto other parts. Sorry about that. Put it onto other parts of our sites that will continue to help and do, we can test on that point, iterate from there. And, it's that collaboration is just so important. So definitely, as much as you can, have that two-way street of collaboration with UX. It's very, very valuable.
Cool.
Other thing, obviously, that's very important is collaboration with kind of the engineering and dev teams. Mostly, it's from my side, it's more risk mitigation. If you have your own CRO, like I have a CRO developer on my team who does a lot of work for our program. So it's, I don't necessarily need to collaborate with the dev team as much for specific tests. Maybe there's a specific server side test, or maybe there's something that's really complicated. I might need their help. But for the most part, we're trying to be as independent as we can. But where collaboration with engineering is very important is risk mitigation. What that means is you're running a test. The dev team rolls out a change to the website. It messes up something that you had in your experiment, and you don't realize that or catch it unless you ask them. You off chance QA it live. Something could break in your experiment and you don't know until you know, and you don't know if you'll ever know.
Yeah,
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, unless you are in the loop, right? So
exactly.
You don't know what messed it up, right?
Yeah,
so, yeah,
exactly.
And that happens. If there are, again, bigger companies, different teams, smaller, if you are a small startup or smaller, then everybody knows what's going on. But when you have bigger, larger teams, and then you don't know what somebody else is working on, what they are rolling out, and that can mess up. That happens medium-sized companies too, not just Fortune 500 companies. That
It's
happens.
not unique. It's not unique to company size.
Yeah. Well, smaller companies you can manage much easier.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep. One other collaboration I love with engineering teams, it's kind of a neat, it's like a CRO trick, is I will have the dev team build into the code of the page a specific asset, specific functionality, something, and then they'll display none it. And then we use our experiment tool to remove the display none, or the opposite could happen where they'll add something on the page and we'll use our testing tool to hide it. That way the code in the experiment is not doing the heavy lifting. It's doing a very simple manipulation. But we're shifting a little bit more of the onus of the experiment code onto the dev team and onto the page itself to make those changes. Versus you having to, maybe there's like a brand new customer testimonial scroller that you need to add on the page. Instead of you adding the code in the experiment, and on the off chance that maybe the tag takes a little bit longer to execute the code or something like that, you instead by default load it on the initial load of the page and then use the experiment to run it more efficiently and hide or unhide a particular element. Yeah.
The challenge though in that scenario isn't like when you rely heavily on dev, then you are relying on their timelines and priorities. And so on the flip side, what I've been also doing is, yes, if you have dev team and if you have that collaboration going so well, like, hey, you will always be in our list. We'll dedicate 5%, 10% our time on whatever you're asking. But if you don't have that kind of resources, what we've been doing is, hey, forget dev team. We can just create it in the experiment itself, see if it works, then push dev team to say, prioritize this to roll out.
Yeah. So I think there's use cases for both. So it just depends on particularly what you're testing. In a perfect world, you can kind of have everything be independent from the dev team. And that's kind of the purpose of an experimentation tool, is that you don't have that heavy reliance on the dev team.
Correct.
But there are certain instances where the code lift is going to be too great in the experiment that you could potentially cause,
problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So there are a lot of experiments that I've run where we've done it that other way, just as a pure site speed play. And we had the resources to do it. I think big or small company, you're always going to have a mixed bag of how much dev resources you'll have to support everything that you need in your CRO program. So as much as you can be independent, I think that'll always serve you in a better way. But there's also other things to kind of think about with site speed. And if you can prioritize it with the dev team to do particular things in ways that optimize for that site speed too, those are always more preferential than obviously slowing your site down.
Yep. Cool.
And then the last kind of like collab is, I kind of mentioned it before, is like collaboration with the brand teams. So they might have initiatives that they want to, run on the landing pages. They might have initiatives that they want to test in campaigns that they want to run. You as a center of excellence with CRO, or you as a person who's involved in kind of optimizing for the website, should be heavily involved in those processes. If anything, just to be involved in data collection and helping them with maybe like heat mapping and other things like that. But in particular, like I mentioned that example previously where we added like gifts under $50 banner underneath the low to high. That was one example of a test that we ran on the web. And as soon as that test won and won big, that was a concept that was taken from digital and moved offline. So if you go to like the local storefronts for some of these, you literally see like gifts under $40 is like a huge banner that was in their storefront. And that largely stemmed from a simple A/B test that we ran with a small banner on a category page. So that's also where test to learn comes into play, where you're taking these learning tests to help influence their brand initiatives. It's also something where you need to be very aware of with brand initiatives that tests that you run are within their general guidelines. Like you can't go off the reservation from like a copy or tone perspective and like swear if your brand doesn't swear or something like that. I'm sure they have their own restrictive guidelines, but also if you collaborate with them and you have a good relationship, you can talk to them and say, we'd like to try a test where we go and push the brand a little bit in a different direction. And if it does work, maybe that gives data to feed into the brand team for them to change their standards. So that's not to say fixate entirely on what their guardrails might be, but it's a two-way street. You should try and work with them to help them and vice versa. It shouldn't just be you follow their standards and that's it, or you don't follow their standards and that's it. Collaborate with them as much as you can, because it's very much a two-way street that they need your help and you need them to make sure that there's consistent messaging, consistent, tone, et cetera, throughout the site.
Yep. You don't want those experiences to be so widely different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a pretty big difference between like, a high converting page, but a brand experience that just like doesn't make sense from page to page to page. So yeah, you could hyper focus and get the highest converting page, but it just from a brand perspective, it may not be approved, so to speak.
Correct. Yep.
Cool. The next topic I wanted to talk about was kind of just always be testing, which you kind of touched on it last. Effectively, it's just talking about, in general, try and be lean with your hypotheses as much as you can, especially if you are limited with kind of dev resources. Let's say you want to run an A/B test. I think I have an infographic here. Yeah.
Any other questions from audience? Comments? And those who are doing CRO, I would love to hear from you, like what you're experiencing, how you're doing it, etc. So if you want to leave a comment, not now, maybe later, feel free to comment on this post, this video.
So yeah, I think like thinking about quality versus quantity of tests. Let's say, for example, you want to run a test and on the left-hand side, you want to effectively test into customer testimonials. That's kind of the core of your hypothesis. On the left-hand side, you could have a really cool interactive carousel. You could have, 5 different images. It's mobile responsive. And it's just, it might require more dev and tech design work versus on the right-hand side, you're keeping core to the hypothesis that you're testing a testimonial, but you're trimming down a little bit of the fat, which would be the dev lift. So it's not going to be as long for the dev team to pump this out. It's not going to take as long for the design team to do something like this, while still staying core to the hypothesis that you're testing into a particular testimonial. So there's no real hardened rule. It kind of just depends on the program and the test and everything like that. But that would be an example of kind of thinking about more lean while still being in kind of a test to learn mentality where you're still learning about the testimonial, but you're trying to compromise a little bit with the design and a little bit with the dev work so that you could still test a concept and not have it take, 3 sprints. Maybe it can fit into the next sprint because it's not that big of a ticket item.
Yeah.
So always consider be lean as much as you can. The other thing I want to talk about too is just like, think about your prioritization framework with your testing and always prioritize your iterations of tests. I think I already mentioned it, but I want to kind of staple this home. If you have, let's say, a backlog of 10 tests you want to run, and after the 3rd test, you find not a winner, but some test that gives you a really valuable insight that you're like, if I just iterate on this test, it'll give us other insights that I'd really like to try into. Don't wait and put that at test 11. Put that as test 4 if you're able to, or maybe test 5. Prioritize it higher in the queue so that you capitalize on those insights. Versus if you wait until test 11, then you're missing out on something that could potentially be a big winner for you. So that's something that I've always tried to do, is just as much as you can with iterations, try and be agile with it, be flexible, because you will get bigger wins based on those learnings with, more learning tests and more iterations than staying true to a hard set in stone type roadmap. The other thing I wanted to call out too was talking a little bit more about parallelism, which I think, I forget the person's name that you mentioned, but one thing I want to just specifically call out with parallelism is if you're running kind of a test where you have a single test, and then after you're done building it, then you run it. And then after you run it, you analyze the results. And then after that, you build the next test. This is not optimized for you hitting good test volume. So the alternative is, as much as you can, while you're building a test, you're already having another test running and you're analyzing the results from the previous one. Mm-hmm. So it may not always sync up entirely with the timeline, but as much as you can, try to build that queue and help backfill. That will always be helpful. I think this sometimes could get broken as you iterate, and that's fine, but always try and build a little bit of buffer so that you're always having some type of test running, because as we know, it's something like 1 in 7, 1 in 8 tests is a test winner, which means the 6 out of 10 or 6 out of 7 will not. So it's a numbers game, right? And the more tests you run, the more you'll win. But also remember, test to learn. The more tests you're running, the more you're going to learn. So as much as you can run more and more and more tests, you'll win.
Yeah. So in those scenarios, what would you say? Let's say you plan out 6, 7 tests. Hey, we're going to run this one. Then after that's done, we'll run out and do another one. But then you learn something during that test and say, hey, we should actually iterate on this thing rather than that second test we were thinking about. Yeah. What are your views? Should we just do that, or continue with that process and put it as that 8th thing that will run?
Yeah, I would say prioritize it as much as you can, but what also goes into the prioritization framework is how quickly you can iterate. So iterations generally are lower lift than not, but there are some iterations that you have an insight. Like, okay, so I did run a test where we kind of tested 2 elements. We tested an experience. And what we saw was on a micro conversion level, which is like add to cart, like forum starts, etc. People who are more earlier into the conversion funnel, versus macro conversion is people who like ultimately bought something. We saw that a lot of people actioned a new element that we added, and that new element would take them to a conversion form. Mm-hmm. So we tested into that. What we saw was overall conversion rates dropped, but the amount of people who gravitated towards this new element that we added was absurd.
Yeah.
So we could do one of 2 things. One, we had another conversion experience that we could keep that same front end, but just swap out the links and have it linked to a new form instead of that older form, and then try that. That took literally 20 minutes of code edit. And then we relaunched it. Spoiler alert, 20% lift to conversion rate. And that was awesome.
Wow.
But the alternative could have been, all right, well, this is a good winner, but let's iterate and build a brand new conversion experience. And building a brand new conversion experience would have taken you a longer time. So it's just like, it depends on kind of what you have available. For us, it was easier because we did have that other kind of conversion experience available to us to simply update a hyperlink. But if it just kind of depends on what the data is telling you and how you can iterate from. So as much as you can prioritize it, do it. Again, if you can be a little bit more lean and continue to go in that learning mentality, great. But also recognize that you don't want to test into a version that you don't love from a learning perspective. That's not going to be valuable. You don't want to waste the traffic that's coming to it. So it's okay if you're not finding kind of a low-hanging fruit thing to test and you need to give it a little bit more time. But try and prioritize it as much as you can because there are insights to be gained from the iterations and the compounded iterations.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent point. Here's another comment from JB Wyman. Do you think circulating experiment playbooks are an effective way of experiment evangelizing to product teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends. And I think it depends on how you're, like, what information you're circulating in the playbooks and who you're circulating it to. So when I speak to senior leadership, how I talk to them is much different than how I speak to, folks within the CRO, my own CRO team, versus how I speak to a person who's in customer service who doesn't understand really much about CRO. So there's a very big difference in how you're communicating it. If you have a single playbook, it might be difficult for people to understand it unless you're able to simplify it in such a way that you kind of maybe disseminate only learnings and some results, and then maybe show some screenshots that might be valuable. I've always found that heat maps and session recordings always are more attractive than just saying plus 25% lift to conversion rate. It's very hard to ignore a rainbow of a screenshot. So definitely, I think it's a good idea. Just think about the execution as you're working on that, because if you just share it out to everyone, if you're putting too much data and you're making it too if you're talking to me as a CRO person, I geek out on all the data. If you sent me that playbook, I would want more data. I'd love to read more about it. Versus if you're sending it out to, your boss's boss who doesn't understand CRO but knows you run tests and wants to see data and, wants to see some screenshots and see A versus B. Maybe you need to simplify it. So I think it's a good idea. Just think about execution on what data you're surfacing in there.
Cool.
All right. All right. So I had a couple more sections. I know we're kind of coming up a little bit on time, but I'll try and rush through these. I do have a very fun exercise for you, Anil. I wanted to show this to you to see if you can find the problem within here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So look at this snapshot and let me know if you notice anything within here that seems off. And this is a snapshot of coronavirus data in 2020. Total cases, new cases, deaths, new deaths, etc., based on countries. It was like March 2020, and to be clear, this was an actual screenshot.
What am I looking for here?
Something that might seem off or weird. Like if you were an analyst and you were looking at this, is there any particular data points on here that you'd be like, that's weird?
You have new cases. Thailand is definitely new cases are slowing down. Total deaths in Indonesia. Finland, new deaths.
Yep. So looking at this, you would say, wait a minute, that's a data point that sticks out a little bit, right? -1. And there's only one reasonable explanation for this, right? There's a zombie apocalypse and we're all going to die. Someone got brought up from the dead and now is living, right? That's not actually the reality, of course. What likely happened was there was someone who was previously counted as deceased maybe the day before, and then they had to correct for the next day. So it was a -1 death. When the reality was there's a functional reason why that makes sense. But like if you were to trust that the data is seen in a particular way, you might literally think there's a zombie apocalypse because a person got brought from the dead. So it's a fun exercise that I try and
Yeah, I was still like -1, but then my brain was, is it calculating new deaths compared to the last time frame? And then saying we got one less person dead. So
yeah, I think it was just a correction. It was just a correction that they overcounted one day, so they had to correct for it the next day. And that was just a snapshot.
that person has been reborn now.
Yeah. But kind of on that point, data is so important to CRO, and not only kind of stress testing your metrics, but having a root understanding of what they're tracking, what they're not tracking, and making sure that they work properly, because your trust in how your experiments work is based on a solid foundation that all of your data is telling you what you think it's telling you.
Mm-hmm.
So like in that previous example, if you just saw that, if you didn't have an understanding of how they were counting it, your interpretation might literally be that there's a zombie apocalypse.
Exactly.
The reality is, you know, how we can make a generalized hypothesis that they're counting this based on, you know, week over week, and they overcorrected one day, so they had to correct for it the next day. So it's very important for you to know potentially like conversion rate. How is that explicitly defined? For an e-commerce site, is it literally someone who adds to cart, converts on a specific page? It might be more straightforward with kind of, you know, e-commerce sites, but think about like maybe lead forms on a B2B. Let's say you have a subset of pages and they're all lead forms, but let's say like someone becomes a lead through live chat. Is that counted the same way in the tool that you're reporting compared to the, you know, the traditional form leads or not? And obviously that's important for your experiments to know the whole of what's happening. So do you have all the metrics that you need, and are they all tracking properly? Also, are you making sure that if you're let's say looking for a generic form completion event, that someone somewhere filled out a form, and you assume that it's someone who submitted, you know, the lead form and live chat, but the reality is live chat isn't pushing to it, then, you know, that's a problem, because you're interpreting the metric on one way when it's not actually being configured in that way. So I want to say a healthy skepticism, but I guess more just like a regular sanity check of how things are being tracked. Again, that's why syncs with engineering teams always helpful and impactful. But kind of just doing like a quarterly check-in with your metrics to make sure that they're all making sense, that they all track properly. One thing you could even do is like micro conversion. So things like add to cart, for example. You want to make sure that people who all click add to cart, that math adds up with the amount of people who get to an add to cart page.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a way to sanity check some metrics. I always do that within my experience to make sure things make sense. So just kind of being obsessed with making sure that the data is clean and making sense.
Yeah. Data quality. Absolutely. You know, you have to stand behind the data, right? When you tell somebody, hey, this is what happened, do you feel confident? You know, because your job could be on the line there. If you're not confident, you can't make other people be confident in that analysis of that result.
Yep.
And that's one of the things I've seen in experiments. And you mentioned very early on about the analytics and implementation part of things, right? Those have to be, perfect before you can move on. You can't just rely on faulty data. Is it tracking everything? Is it tracking the way you want it to be tracked? I remember there was an experiment where somebody, they were checking whether it's the clicks or the swipes on the phone or app, which one is better. And accidentally, the developer copied the code, and the data was all messed up. So you could not even see swipes from clicks. And now you're running an experiment to find that out, but something changed during that process. You do not know, right?
Yeah.
You did not know about those. And now your experiment results are bad. So you can't stand behind those results.
Yep.
Right. So those similar to this stuff, it doesn't happen just online, offline too. You know, FDA gets results from individual hospitals and doctors on what's working, what's not working. And if they are not reporting the data back, guess what? FDA does not know, and their results are going to be flawed.
Yeah.
It happens all over the place, right?
100%. One of the things I do, and I know a lot of experimenters say never peek at experiments. I peek at them all the time, but I peek at it with a particular goal in mind. I'm not interpreting any of these results. I'm not looking at it to say, oh, it looks like it's winning or losing. I might look at it just to make sure that things are tracking properly. Things are like queuing the experiment live after day 5, just to make sure that the experiment's still triggering what I intend for it to trigger. But also doing things like quick math. So, okay, I have a particular element, and if you click on this particular element, it will take you to a particular page. So I'm tracking clicks on the element, I'm tracking people who get to that particular page and making sure that math adds up. If it's broken, I need to end my experiment because I know I'm not going to have clean data. And there's no point in letting the test. And if you're not doing that early in the process, you're letting an experiment run for 30 days. You have bad data in the process. And then what do you have to show for it at the end? But saying, we messed up, we don't have the right data, we need to do it another 30 days. And you just lost 30 days of traffic.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Peaking, definitely you have to look at. You can't just go and celebrate the results, right?
Yes.
Hey, look how good this is doing. You have to look at and see if everything is working fine or not. I mean, some companies, I've worked with where they have built their own internal experimentation platforms. They have good way of identifying and alerting. Not every tool has that. And if you don't have those kind of alerts built in, then you have to look at. And, one of the things that I mentioned here, and which I have learned from Ronnie Kohavi, who's running Microsoft Experiments, is the Twyman's Law. And I've put a video out here on Twyman's Law, which basically says if something looks different from what you expect, it likely is. If I'm expecting 5% lift, and all of a sudden I'm seeing 90% lift in my conversion, something is likely wrong there.
Yeah.
Or negative 90%, something is wrong there. So that's why you have to look at those results and see, is it aligning with how we were thinking? If not, there will be things which will be deviating from how you're thinking. But if the deviation is too much, then you know that something is wrong there.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think a couple other quick call outs on here for data collection is just on that point about the micro conversions adding up to macro. I'm obsessed with micro conversions and tracking them because they give you insights into behavior, and insights into behavior is critically important for test to learn. So as you're running these experiments, if you just get a macro level of, I added an element on a product page and conversion rate was impacted by Y. Well, you're not helping to paint a story of people getting through a conversion funnel, people even getting into the conversion funnel, and people interacting with this particular element. So it's not to say that statistical significance is not a play, that you're not improving conversion rate, but test to learn critically involves you understanding how this particular element is influencing overall behavior. And if you are adding this element and it's improving behavior in a particular way, then you can iterate from there and you know that concept works, versus just saying, all right, this works, let's try our next test in the log. So I always obsess with micro conversions. I track all of them. They're very important, and it's critically important to define them pre-experiment, because you obviously can't get this post-experiment. You have to set it up within the experiment. Otherwise, you launch it, you see the results, and you're like, dang, I wish I tracked this before I launched the experiment. Yeah. And then the last thing, which I think is critically important, is like segmentation. So looking at, Bing versus Google, desktop versus mobile, obviously is a huge one. But, are there even particular subset of users, like maybe video watchers, like I mentioned before, versus not? Product page visitors versus category page visitors, people who added to cart, and then analyzing their behavior versus those who didn't, to try and see if you could identify what was the behavior for people who did add to a cart versus those who didn't. And maybe that's a trend of something that you could test into in the future. So segments are very important. Definitely try and intelligently create segments and optimize experiences for the segments, to the point of hopefully ultimately getting down to personalization. But segment is the vehicle to getting into a personalized experience.
Yep. Yeah, you mentioned about segmentation, and previous points somewhere where you were talking about like this segment, it worked and it worked really well. And overall, if you look at the experiment, then the result might have been negative or flat.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what segmentation allows. And also in the negative, also you can see is even if there is an overall lift, you still segment to see are there certain segments that are not, experiencing, or when you're not seeing the same level of lift. There could be other problems. You mentioned, mobile versus desktop. It could be a browser version. I've seen this browser version creates a problem all the time. Like, it's working on Chrome, it's working on Edge, but maybe people are still using IE and it doesn't work on that. So you have to look at not only, those things like the segment from video watchers, etc., but also the technical side of things. So both of them.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really care about IE users anymore anyway.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Edge is gaining, I like Edge now more than I used to like, or actually more than Chrome.
I am a Chrome loyalist. And I have no shame about that.
Cool.
All right. Well, the last topic I wanted to cover just really quick was kind of just politics. And I think there's a level of politics around optimization where you can be like, you can talk about the data, you could talk about the results, and you can say everything. And you can say, I have a winning test that'll lift the results by, 5,000% to conversion rate. But if you're not being the right type of person to communicate the results, you're not saying it in the right type of way. Like, I forget the user who mentioned the playbook, but like if you're coming forward with a presentation with a, that's too in the weeds and they're not understanding it, you might not get the buy-in that you're looking for. So there's a little bit of storytelling for sure. There's a little bit of politics that's in play to it, but I think it's a valuable skill set to try and adopt as much as you can within CRO for a number of reasons. One, there's a lot of sweet talking that may go on involving kind of working with the dev team to potentially get specific tests into sprints or, kind of push and pull to say, okay, this particular test, I'm cool scaling back. Next test, we absolutely need to maybe go a little bit more heavy and try the more disruptive design. Working with product managers to get tests into sprints. Working with brand, again, there's a little bit of a push and pull to say, I hear you on this brand thing that you're very strict on, but let's try and test it versus not. There's a lot of politics that is involved in this. One of the things that I think is very important to get home the point of this is play nicely and foster a culture of participation. So you're involving the brand team to contribute and be part of the experimentation. You're allowing, engineering to be involved in the process as much as they need to be and as much as they'd like to be. You're involving the UX teams, and I think there's a deep collaboration that really needs to be had with them in particular, that they're not a participator in CRO, they're a major driver in the program. Yeah. And another thing is like, hear every test idea. Every test idea is valuable. I was arguing with Ben of CXL, playfully arguing, just, I think I made a post like, there's no bad test ideas. And he's like, well, some of my test ideas are bad. I'm like, my approach of how I'm talking about this is there's no bad test idea, which means if someone comes to you with a test idea, it's not you immediately say, we're not going to test that. That's a bad idea. It's a reframe to say, what is your idea? What is your hypothesis? What are your data points that are coming from for this particular test idea? Like maybe a customer service rep comes to you and says, we are getting a lot of complaints on live chat about this new category page that is too confusing to add to cart. Like, okay, I hear your point. Like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you show me the chats? Let's talk deeper about this. You may have already tested it. Maybe they come to you an idea with the test and you've already run the test, but that's not the end of the conversation. You show them the test and you say, hey, look, I hear you. This is a test that we ran and these were the results. But what do you think? Does this make sense to you? Like, do you have any ideas for the other tests? Because you're encouraging that participation. You're getting people more involved in the process that they'll want to contribute. And there has to be a certain level of transparency too. I think a lot of there are a few CROers who give a bad name to CRO where they kind of create this black box of this is my program, like back off. that's not the way to do it, because you're not going to get the buy-in that you need. You're not going to get the collaboration and, executive support to scale your program to what you need. You need to get people participating, excited, and interested to see what you're doing. Like I mentioned, that meeting with the senior leadership team. I welcomed everyone talking to me about this. They saw all this data. They're like, this is awesome. Show me this test idea. Talk to me about this. And I blasted off my, roadmap to them and said, this is a roadmap, play around with this. Ask me if you have any questions. I'm happy to jump into this more, but you can see what we're doing. This is not a black box. This is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Test ideas can come from anywhere, and it doesn't you can't dismiss them. And one of the companies I know, I'm trying to remember, but people were empowered to come up with these ideas. And not only that, get a team to, test that out on a smaller set of audience. And one of the tests I remember was worth millions of dollars. Even somebody was sitting on this idea for a while, said, okay, we'll do it later. But then this developer actually said, hey, I am going to actually create these two versions and see it. And that turned out to be worth millions of dollars. Nobody believed it, even when the results were shown, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Then you scale it to other users and get a bigger pool to test it out, and then they were able to see it actually did have an impact. And that was basically you can come up with very small ideas, something that might not seem big, but you never know, because people are not, when I go on a site or you go on a site or interact, we're not thinking from our conscious mind at that point. It's a subconscious mind in play. Right? We make so many emotional decisions at that point, and little things make a big difference.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it's optimization, right? It's taking little tweaks to make sure that everything they're doing is optimized. It's not like conversion rate, I don't know, restructure or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think the last topic is this is always a fun one, right? Let's talk about HIPPOs, which is the highest paid paid person's opinion.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've dealt with them. It's just, it can be so disheartening for you to run a test, get a positive uptick, go through all the results, all the ideation, all the test building, see a 20% lift to conversion rate, and then your boss's boss is like, yeah, I don't like how this looks. We're not doing this. And it's all right, well, crap. What do we do now? I think there's a couple strategies to think about how to approach those potential people who are not that open to testing or optimization. What really helps is getting them involved in the test building and ideation process. So if you have brainstorms, get them involved in that. If there's a design, get them involved with an approval or a check-in with the design. So it's not at the very end, it's here's a new design and here are the results. It's, you knew this was the design, you knew this was going to be a test, and now you see the results. It's not they just see it at the last step. So it kind of lessens the shock of it. Mm-hmm. They're involved very early in the process. What also can be helpful is kind of understanding if they are hesitant to the results. What is their hesitation? Is it they're critical of the data? Are they maybe not understanding statistical significance in that way? Or is it more of the design that they don't love and they just don't want that particular design being published on the website? So if it's more critical on data, what you could do is focus more on education of statistics, talk to them about the metrics and show them, conversion rate got lifted by 10%, but also FYI, look at this, add to cart increased by 20%. People who got to the checkout page was 15%. So you could see all along the way, everything increased along the way, hence micro conversion, super important. But if it's more of the design adversity, again, involving them early in the process is always helpful. But if they don't, even if at the end they, for some reason, have hesitation and they don't love the design, talk to them about why they don't love the design, because it's always possible that you could keep the core hypothesis and tweak the design. that's always a possibility, especially if you have a really good UX team that will help you in the design of that. It's always possible to keep the winning hypothesis. And that's not to say, like, even if you have a winning test, you're not going to just keep that and move on. You're always going to potentially iterate from there and tweak that even more and more. So, use the UX team to kind of iterate from there. And another kind of like the last point between that is just try to understand their point of view. So let's say you you keep on going back to like that experimentation playbook, but let's say you show a playbook to your senior advisor, to an executive, senior executive. What if their point of view is our challenge with our business is we do not have a good conversion rate, and you're presenting them 5 winning tests that drop conversion rate by 2% and lift maybe AOV by 15%. So you're driving more net revenue, but you're dropping conversion rate. Maybe their POV is, no, I don't want more revenue. I don't need more AOV. I'm focused on conversion rate. So there's a little bit of a mismatch between, yeah, it's a winner and it's a better experience, potentially, assuming all the other KPIs kind of align out. But their point of view is, no, I want conversions. I don't want AOV. And despite it still being a winner, I think part of it's just you have to connect with the team and the senior leaders to say, okay, what are the tests you'd like to run? Let's maybe shift our prioritization framework and our tests and our hypotheses more to improve that conversion rate based on your goals that you're trying to set out versus optimizing for AOV or something else.
Yeah. And I think as your program matures, those things become very clear early on, like, okay, what is that organization trying to do, or the objective you're trying to achieve, right? So then you can design your experiments, find the other data and say, yes, we are optimizing for this thing, but your results might show you something. And that can be a learning, which can send a message or tell them, hey, we need to rethink about how we're doing business. So, getting everybody involved. I think you talked about collaboration a lot. I think, initially when you are small, you might not get as many collaborators, but as these experiments, get infused in the organization, you will get more collaborators, and the process will become smoother.
Yes.
You know the metrics that you're trying to improve, other metrics that you need to look, the kind of experiences you need to build, and everybody will be aligned.
Yeah, when you're a smaller company,
not smooth sailing.
Yeah, when you're a smaller company, it's easier to do CRO, but it's harder to do good CRO. And when you start to grow into a bigger company, it's harder to do CRO, but it's easier to do better CRO, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you have, it's a lot harder to do CRO if you don't even have a dedicated UX team. That's not to say you can't do it, but it's a lot easier for me to not have the responsibility of the entire design of a landing page. Instead, I go to my UX team and say, hey guys, here's our test. Here's previous tests, winners and losers, i.e. here are the learnings that we've got. Here's a hypothesis. Here's kind of a rough wireframe of kind of what we were thinking. Can you guys make this a design that we can then get to our dev team internally or externally, build this out and run the test?
Cool. All right, we are over our time. So any other points you have, or you, okay?
No, all set.
Cool. So yes, this was a wonderful conversation, great points. And those who are still watching this stream, and if you have any questions, feel free to put those questions as comments. I'll make sure Shiva gets those questions and we'll answer them in the comments. If you don't have any questions, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. I will be sending the recording out in the email to those who have signed up for this session. If you haven't signed up, I'll drop a link for you to sign up so you can be on that mailing list, and you'll get this session as well as notifications about future sessions. So thank you very much, Shiva. This was wonderful. I'm glad you could make time to come and talk about CRO. And like I said before, I always enjoy your messages. I'll keep watching and interacting with you. Hopefully we'll bring you back again and listen more from a different point of view from you on CRO.
For sure.
So
Thanks for having me.
J.W. Wyman says thanks, guys. Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye. I'm gonna end the stream now. Bye, guys.